Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host Manny Maradiege, bringing you guys some more topics to discuss about here today on today's episode. Talking some more NFL rule changes. I'm going to talk to you guys about the running back market and some things that were said in regards to the running backs in the market and what the overall census is, the feeling around the running backs this year are. In the last part of the show, I'm going to bring in another topic to discuss the Giants and the recent rumors about trading up in the draft and what I make of it, my thoughts on it, and if it would ultimately be a good move for the Giants. Stick around for that conversation, as well as the Seahawks and their quarterback situation of their own. New head coach Mike McDonald wasn't 100% in on both the quarterbacks that they have currently on their roster, and I'm going to break down more of what he said and what it could mean for Geno Smith and Drew Lock. That's all coming to you guys on today's episode. But before I start on today's episode, I want to remind you guys to please use the tip and donations link with any questions that you may have during the show. We got a new tip and donations link, as you can see on the screen now. The tip and donations link is GSMC Sports or GSMCpodcast.net. I got to get used to saying that. It's GSMCpodcast.net with any questions or comments that you may have during the show. This just makes sure I'm able to see your question. It pops up on the chat box here to my right, and I'm able to interact with you guys during the show, and it makes it easier for me. And not only that, it's a massive help for the show. Not only this one, but all the shows around the network, and it's greatly appreciated every time we get to use that link, and anytime you guys come in with a question and use that tip and donations link during any of our shows. But with that being said, I could jump into that first story I talked about before, which is the running backs and what the general census is around them heading into free agency. The biggest report coming from ESPN and Adam Schefter, I believe was the first one to report it, was that the running backs, none of the big name running backs in this year's draft, the free agency, Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Austin Eckler, are all not expected to be franchise tagged by any of their current teams. And that was pretty big news on its own. But I have some quotes here from some members of NFL teams that, commented on the running backs and, kind of just got me to think about the running back situation and just what surrounds the running backs, because a lot of these guys say one thing and then their actions might show a different thing with the way the running back market is set up now and how a lot of people feel it's not fair to running backs. But one NFL member from the Ravens said that, could you imagine Saquon Barkley and Lamar Jackson in the same backfield for the running game? That was a quote from ESPN's Jeremy Fowler. And another quote that was said from the new offensive coordinator from the Chargers was that he also asked a rhetorical question, he said almost the same thing. Can you imagine Justin Herbert with a great running game? We don't know, but I can imagine what it might look like, so that's the kind of vision I have. That was Greg Roman, newly hired by Jim Harbaugh for the Chargers offensive coordinator position. And, the sentiment there is almost the same thing. They're basically saying the same thing about two, or really one, running back. The Ravens organization member mentioned Saquon Barkley. Greg Roman didn't mention anybody, but all the running backs, the top end running backs in the free agency market are top of the line guys. And, both of them are, anticipating having one of those guys. They want one of those guys, it seems like, by the comments that they made. And, that's how they make it seem. All the teams would probably say the same thing. A lot of teams in the NFL would probably say the same thing. We'd love a great running back. It would make the offense so much more different, better, more dynamic, having a guy that could do it all, like the Saquon Barkleys of the world, the Christian McCaffreys, the Derrick Henrys, the Austin Ecklers, I guess before last season, but leading up to last season, he was one of the top-end running backs. And, I think it's kind of funny when you see these guys say that, but the running back market is the way that it is, and it almost just you don't know where to stand on it. If these guys truly felt the way that they did, these organization members, these coaches, coordinators, if they felt a certain way about it, of course, most of them might not be making the decisions money wise and just team fit wise, looking long term. If they feel this way about it, you'd think they'd do everything that they can to get one of these guys on their team. And I think a lot of the fear, a lot of the sentiment behind that is that nobody wants to be the using an analogy, the guy that buys an expensive car or a car with a lot of mileage on it and having it just fall apart one day when they're driving on any given day on the road somewhere. They don't want to be the guy that overpays for one of these running backs and then they get really hurt or they just struggle with injuries during their time with that team. And then everybody questions, this is why we don't pay running backs. This is why this was a huge mistake for them to pay this team. I think that sentiment has gone too far in one direction, in my opinion, and that's where it stands currently. And I just don't think it's fair to really base them off of that point because a lot of these guys do so much for their teams. Of course, no one's going to be Christian McCaffrey on the 49ers, but the Saquons, the Derrick Henrys, like I mentioned, other guys on other teams, Alvin Kamara, Bijan Robinson that just got to the Atlanta Falcons. They get into these teams so early on, pretty young. Bijan Robinson's a young player. And unfortunately, you get situations like the one with Saquon, and he's been with the Giants, I think, like 5 years now, heading into year 6 or year 5, and he still hasn't gotten that big contract like a Derrick Henry has. Derrick Henry already got a pretty decently valued contract for a running back, and now he's on to his second, potentially away from the Titans. And that's almost the best case scenario that you can get at this point. I'm sure Christian McCaffrey will also get another contract down the line with the 49ers, but it's crazy to think how one or two of these running backs that are very great all-world talents, but they're still searching for that one contract. Josh Jacobs is almost in the same boat. He hasn't been in the league as long as Saquon, but he's another one that had a good year. Now he's coming off of a pretty rough year, and these organizations, all they need is one bad year, 1 year where it didn't look right. They might look slow, or because of the offensive line could have been bad, they didn't produce the same amount of numbers that they have in the past. They now get really skeptical and they won't pay for a top-end running back to get to where they need to be in their organization kind of fit. And again, that just seems unfair to me in some aspect. And I think a lot of these teams, another thing with a lot of these teams is that they believe that they could just not overpay for a running back and potentially draft one or just find one in free agency somewhere. An unsigned draft pick that, makes it all the way through the draft, gets signed somewhere, and then you get, those stories you always see, an unsigned rookie making this sort of impact. You always see it at least once in the NFL, each NFL season. One of these crazy stories like a Jalen Warren or a Kyron Williams that really a lot of people don't know about, and they have great success with their team. And I think a lot of people in organizations want to go that route, and it's a lot easier said than done, obviously, because the chances of you finding a running back like that are a lot lower than I think people would really truly believe. And a lot of the running backs now, the ones that led the league in stats and production and all that stuff, they're all pretty highly drafted. I go back to saying Christian McCaffrey, Najee Harris was another one that was drafted in the first round, Derrick Henry, and just all these guys that produce and they were drafted really high and they validate being drafted that high, and then they get through 5 or 6 years of it and people just think they're done for some reason. And it's getting to a point now where the running backs have been more vocal about it, but it's getting harder and harder to see someone pay a lot of money for these teams. The Giants are one team, obviously, with Saquon that they're not going to franchise tag him again, obviously, like I said. but their general manager, Joe Shane, has uttered already in this week's NFL Combine that he would love to work out something with Saquon. They would love to keep him on the team. But there's always still that doubt, at least in my head, of, if you really truly mean that, how much do you value him? I'm sure Saquon thinks he's a $12 to $13 million guy, but are the Giants willing to pay that? Are they willing to lose Saquon and then really not have another running back on an already middle of the pack, bottom end of the pack kind of offense? There's questions around Daniel Jones that I'll talk about later in this episode. All those things come into my mind. Like, it seems so obvious that you have to keep Saquon on your team, but everyone is thinking that, he might just fall off. He might get an injury and then it's done for. It's a weird place where the NFL is with running backs and just thinking this way. All these running backs, without a doubt, are going to get signed somewhere, but it'll be interesting to see what the dynamic will be going forward with how much the first guy gets paid and then how much the next guy gets paid and so on and so forth, how these organizations really measure how they value these guys with each other. If one pays maybe too much for one guy, the other team might offer less or they might offer more just to make sure they get their own guy. It's an interesting dynamic in the NFL now that we see with the running backs, and wherever these running backs end up, I'm sure that they're still going to produce in the way that they have been just recently in their careers. Saquon is still 27 to 28 years old. He's still got at least 3 more good years in him, in my estimation. I know he's got in some ankles and knee injuries, but if he goes to the right situation, I have no doubt that he'll be great. It just depends on how much each of these teams are willing to pay and, risk, I guess, to an aspect on Saquon and the Derrick Henrys, the Josh Jacobs going forward. That's where the NFL is now with running backs. It's a weird spot. It's a delicate situation if you're negotiating for these contracts, but that's the NFL, at least right now, with the business side of it. Speaking on the NFL, that would bring me into the next topic I'm going to go into later in the show. The NFL potentially having another rule change coming this season. The league meetings are obviously in March, and there's another petition to get rid of a hip drop tackle in the NFL. And there's been a lot of noise made around that. A lot of people are voicing their concerns with it. People think it should have already been gone in the NFL. But all that and the topics around it, the conversations around it will all be coming up later on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. But now I'll send it to a quick break and bring you guys more football talk in just a few seconds.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Thank you for listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. If you weren't able to catch that first segment, I talked about the running back situation, how the majority of running backs won't be franchise tagged by their current teams, and what that could mean for them, and just my thoughts on how the running backs are valued so far in the NFL and during this free agency. I now am able to move on to the next segment I wanted to bring up in this show. Some more league action going around in the NFL. I talked to you guys yesterday about the kickoff format potentially changing, and now the NFL is moving on to a different topic, or just piling on, I guess, to the kickoff format topic, and they want to bring up the drop hip tackles that have always played a role in the NFL, more so over the last few seasons. I believe it's become more of a national issue around the league, just because I think you're starting to see it a bit more with guys, bigger guys, being hurt, unfortunately, by these sort of tackles. It's basically, if you're unaware of what the drop hip tackle is when, if say you're on defense, you're running after a guy, and you're trying to bring them down, you wrap them up on their upper side or around their hips, and you basically just drop your feet and then just basically become dead weight hanging onto this offensive player. And because of that, you use your momentum to bring them down, and a lot of times these guys end up rolling over onto the offensive player's ankles, knees, and it really gets to some gruesome injuries, some bad injuries that we've seen, unfortunately, to some of the biggest players in the NFL. And obviously that's not good for the league if all these guys are getting hurt, specifically with the league trying to move towards or trending towards a more offensive-centered league. Try to boost the numbers, get the offensive numbers more up there with the scoring and everything. If your top-end guys are getting hurt, a lot of the times it's not only bad, obviously, for the offense, but then I feel like it pushes the NFL to hindering the defense a bit more, and then it leads to a lot of confusion on the field, a lot of players being disgruntled, not agreeing with all the calls that are being made, and it just becomes more of an issue that I think now the NFL really wants to hone in on it and attack this problem, because the NFL Competition Committee is working on it, or is reportedly working on removing these tackles altogether, according to the NFL.com's Judy Batista. The reports also go along to say that, the committee is pretty much in the same sentiment, in the same place regarding the rule, that they feel that it is a dangerous play for NFL and for their stars, but currently at the moment they're looking for the right verbiage, the right sort of language to lay out there in the league's meetings in March to really set it as a point in the rule book, really, essentially, that this is what a drop hip tackle is, this is what you can't do, this is what the referees will be calling, all that sort of stuff. They're trying to get that all right, because if they do take this out of the NFL, it'll be the first time that they take out a sort of dangerous tackle since 2006, where they removed the horse collar tackle, and now that one's a lot more obvious to see if a guy has their hand in another player's shoulder pads and use that to bring it down. But it is a little trickier with the drop hip tackle, because a lot of these guys will obviously try and dive at someone's legs or someone's midsection to bring them down if they're a lot bigger than them. I think that's where the issue will kind of lead to in this next season if it is outlawed, because, how do you tell the difference, honestly, between someone just diving at someone's legs, just full on, or deciphering whether it's a hip drop tackle or not? You can't really review it too much, because even in a review in a slow motion, I find it really hard to decipher what is or what isn't a hip drop tackle. And that's what the competition committee is discussing right now, and it has been a more prominent issue over the last few years, like I mentioned. NFL executive Jeff Miller, who oversees player health and safety, said that this sort of tackle has been becoming more of an issue, and that he actually said that the chance of injury increases by 25 times the rate of a normal tackle does when players use this. And again, just touching on the subject of, these players just doing anything that they can to tackle somebody else, it's something that players right now don't really think about. They don't before they make a tackle or something like that, they don't think about, oh, is this going to be considered a drop hip tackle? Am I going to get flagged for this? They just go in really on instinct a lot of the times, just reacting to the play that they have to make and so on. That, you can't really play defense like that, thinking about, oh, am I going to get flagged for this? Am I hitting this guy too hard? Is this considered a drop hip tackle there, like I said? All that it's going to be really hard for the defenders, really, most of all, to decipher whether this is going to be considered a drop hip tackle or not. There are going to be some hiccups along the road if this is banned from the NFL, but I mentioned before, you see a lot of these players getting injured. Like this past season alone, it was Geno Smith with his ankle, Tyreek Hill, and the most famous one that I remember was Mark Andrews, if you guys recall that game against the Bengals. They were down in the red zone, and they threw it short to Mark Andrews, and he is a pretty big guy for most guys to tackle, linebackers, anybody on defense, and Logan Wilson wrapped him up around the midsection and, dropped his weight and really hurt Mark Andrews on that play. He missed the majority of the season after that. He was able to be active in their game against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, but, he was really never the same. He barely played in that game, and he missed a lot of time because of it, because of this sort of tackle. And now I think the league is at a point where they have to try and do something about it. Miller, the NFL executive, Jeff Miller, further stated in an interview that he had recently, he said, "To quantify it for you, we see an injury more or less every week in the regular season on the hip drop tackle." And he also brought this issue up in the league meetings in October. So this has sort of become an ongoing thing with the NFL and Jeff Miller and other executives that believe this has gone on far enough. I also saw a report that with the NFLPA, a lot of them are sharing the sort of frustrations that I am airing right now, just off the top of my head, with them saying, this is just going to further hinder the defense. This is going to make it a lot more difficult, I guess, for a lack of a better terms, for any defender trying to make a tackle now, because now how are you supposed to bring down a guy? There's a specific way to tackle now, whereas these guys, I don't have to tell you guys, grew up, just get to the ball and tackle him and stop him. No one's thinking about how to do it. And more, I think the NFL is trying to outlaw these things to protect their stars, which I can agree with, but at the same time, it is a tricky sort of thing because, at what point has it gone too far where a tackle isn't just a tackle anymore? And I do agree that the drop hip tackle isn't a normal tackle, but I'm not out there playing every Sunday and thinking about a million other things as a defensive player before I start thinking about, oh, is this a drop hip tackle? Am I going to hurt this guy? It's going to be definitely a topic that goes on if it is passed, and it usually does lead to ankle injuries, like I said, and it is interesting when you're thinking of a quarterback or something like that, or running back, because already the quarterbacks, are mostly protected overall. You can't drop your weight on them. You can't hit them to the face. And now you can't drop hip tackle them, or what is considered to be a drop hip tackle. That's yet to be determined. It's like, at what point can't you not touch the quarterback at all? Just wrap them up and then that's it. I don't think it'll ever get to that. Hopefully not. But that's another thing that's just added on, really adding more pressure onto the defense because of these rules that they're implementing. And it is tough really right now. And the NFL competition committee is in a place where, there's some good members on that I think can voice some sort of reason towards the defense, because there's guys on there like Sean McDermott, Mike Tomlin, Sean McVay now. I think these guys have a good gauge on what the NFL should be, what kind of product that they want to put out there. And it just really comes down to this language, the sort of things they consider to be a drop hip tackle. And, if it does pass, I'm sure they're going to have a bunch of meetings and stuff like that to make sure everybody knows what this is. But it's really not going to stop any attempt, you could say, in games, because, like I mentioned, these players aren't really thinking about that in all the complexes of the game. And you're definitely still going to see it, obviously, whether it's flagged or not. I think it's just going to add a lot more controversy and a lot more things to talk about. If, a drop hip tackle is missed in a game, is that going to be able to be reviewed? If a flag is thrown or not? Like, imagine if Patrick Mahomes or, Joe Burrow gets sacked, it's a drop hip tackle, clearly on the review, but the flag isn't thrown, so it can't be reviewed, and then, where do you go from there? You lose your starting quarterback. You can't review the call or challenge it because no penalty flag was thrown. And then it just becomes this whole thing of diving deeper into the rules. Should every play be able to be reviewed, or what's the point of having this rule if these refs are going to miss it? There's going to be missed calls like that, but a lot of them are going to weigh more than others because it comes down to who's getting tackled, essentially. It's going to be made a bigger deal if these bigger stars are tackled and they might get hurt from it, compared to a third-string wide receiver or something like that who might not get the call, and they still might get injured, but the ref might not call it the same way that they do. All these little nuances that could come into effect are something that the committee has to definitely take into account, but at the same time, it's still in the early facets of trying to determine what is and what isn't a hip drop tackle, and to say it's going to be fully gone from the game, I think would be foolish. And with the NFL finally pointing a lot more light onto it, it'll be fascinating to see what comes of it, what other players think of it. It seems like an obvious choice right now, but if they pitch it to the rest of the NFL and these other teams, you could be surprised at how many would say that they don't want this rule included, that, it wouldn't benefit the players at all. It'll put too much pressure on the defense, and this rule might not get passed at all by all these teams. They need 24 out of the 32 teams to pass a rule change like this, and that's a lot of people that need to agree, a lot of high-end people that need to agree on a rule change before it's passed. And, a lot of players will voice their frustrations or their agreement with it if it does move on, but it's still in its early facets. I want to emphasize that. Nothing's being done about it. Nothing is being guaranteed that this is going to change. It's just been an idea that is becoming more popular, but, there's a lot of things that the NFL has to deal with, has to put into movement before anything is changed. And this is just going to develop, gain more traction over the time of the offseason. And, it's going to be pretty cool to see if the NFL does move on for this. Like I mentioned, it'll be the most recent tackle that has been banned since the horse collar tackle. And I think that one was a lot more easier than the drop hip tackle. But we'll see where this ends up, Still early facets, but we're going to see where this ends up on that. That allows me to move on to my next segment, the Seahawks quarterback question. A lot of people aren't really talking about it. Who's going to be their quarterback? A lot of people think there's a pretty obvious answer, but the guy that runs the whole operation and who really decides who the quarterback is might think differently, or might not see it as easy as a choice as a lot of people do. That and more on the topic heading into the second half of the episode. Don't go away, because that topic's coming up, as well as the Giants and their own quarterback controversy surrounding the draft and what their future could look like if they were to make a move. So I'll be right back after this break. Don't go anywhere. There's a lot more football talk and a lot more discussion to be had on this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, I'm still your host, Manny Maradiaga. If you weren't able to join me for the first two segments, the last segment I talked about was the NFL and potentially changing a rule, banning the drop hip tackle completely from the NFL, and just my thoughts on it, what could happen if this rule was changed, and all the sort of little details that could come into effect if this rule was able to go through and you wouldn't see the drop hip tackle anymore in the NFL. I'm able to talk about the Seahawks now and moving into their quarterback situation under new head coach Mike Macdonald and what he had to say about the two quarterbacks on his staff. But before I move into that, I want to remind you guys again to please engage with the episode. If you do decide to leave a comment, a question in this live episode, I want to remind you guys to please use the tip and donations link that you see running across the ticker below me with any of those questions that you may have. The tip and donations link, if you're not able to see it, it's a new one that we have today. It's gsmcpodcast.net. Again, if you're not able to see it, it's gsmcpodcast.net. This just makes sure I'm able to see your question a lot smoother if it just pops up here on the right side of my screen. And I always love interacting with you guys with any questions that you may have. And it's greatly appreciated if you're able to do that. But that allows me to move on to the next topic that I have lined up here around the Seahawks and their quarterback situation. It's one that I think a lot of people don't bring up. It's one that has kind of gone under the radar just because, the Seahawks aren't really known for making a big move, aren't known or haven't been very active so far in free agency. But with the NFL Combine going on, everyone's being asked questions about their organization, their team, and what's going on. One of them being Mike Macdonald. I thought, personally, this was one of the more interesting and one of the moves that I agreed upon more for the Seahawks to hire Mike Macdonald for their organization now that they decided to move on from Pete Carroll. He obviously had a great season as the defensive coordinator for the Ravens, arguably the best defense in the NFL last year. Now he gets to move up and has a great opportunity with the Seahawks now that they're trying to reincarnate their defense, get back to that defensive side of the ball, that mentality that they had so many years beforehand with the Legion of Boom and everything like that, all the success that they had with the defense. Now they usher in Mike Macdonald. He kind of brings that. He has some decisions to make, though, with the Seahawks and their offensive side of the ball, not so much their defense. It's been talked about a lot, the kind of money that Geno Smith is making, the sort of contract that he's on. Drew Lock as well being included in those conversations just because last year Geno Smith was hurt a lot of the time, and we saw Drew Lock, I want to say for 4 or 5 games there towards the end, that he had some good performances, one against the Philadelphia Eagles, and then other ones where it didn't look so great. He might have had a few turnovers or a good amount of turnovers, and now the Seahawks fans are in a bit of a rough spot because, trying to usher in a new era, trying to get everything under wraps. The biggest part of that is the quarterback position, obviously, and they already had other questions going into this. They're in a tough division, in a pretty wide open conference that they want to compete in because there's only really 1 or 2 favorites now in the conference overall. I think anybody has a good shot of it if they're able to align all their ducks and get everything under control. And with the quarterback specifically, they asked Mike Macdonald at the Combine there, like I mentioned, about the two quarterbacks, and they specifically asked Mike Macdonald if Gino and Drew were both involved in the future of the organization going forward. And his exact words were, "That's a tough question, and it's one that I probably can't answer right now." And he went on to say he's still getting to know them, quite honestly, on a personal level, and that potentially one, both, or maybe neither of them would be involved in the future going forward. And that's really interesting to say. As a head coach coming into this organization, it's a pretty bold thing to say, in my opinion. Just, a lot of the times the coach just come in. A lot of the times some might not want to move the ship, might not want to ride the ship too much in their first season, and really not try to mess anything up. Just try to get through. And if good things happen, that's great. If not, they don't lose their job in the first season. For Mike Macdonald to say this, again, it was pretty bold to say, but at the same time, I kind of liked it in a sense that he's coming in with a mentality that, he's being very honest and a very up forward sort of coach, at least from the comments that he just said. And with Gino and Drew Lock, I think they've kind of just gone by with both of them. Geno Smith, on one hand, was this, I think at one point was this great story. He got over his time with the Jets where it was really bad, and now he found a home with the Seattle Seahawks. And after one good season in 2022, most recently one good season, he signed that big contract, that 3 year, $75 million contract. After that 2022 season, he got that contract, and then after that, he kind of tailed off a little bit. The numbers weren't really there for him. The Seahawks, I want to say, finished 9-8 in the last two seasons with him under the helm. He is going to be 31 years old, if I remember correctly. And now, they're at a point where the age is starting to become a factor. The recent performances don't really back him at this point with the organization and what they want to do with him. And they actually had to restructure his deal leading up to this episode. And early in the free agency period, they actually converted that $9.6 million roster bonus into a signing bonus, basically cutting it in half or creating $4.8 million in cap space. This also, in turn, raises his cap hit to nearly $39 million for 2025 if they were still to keep him under contract, which I think is a serious consideration right now, considering where they are and considering that Mike Macdonald isn't really all in on either of them. There's a lot of things he might have to change with this roster, going up and down this roster. They don't have a lot of cap space. They're in a cap deficit currently. And like I mentioned, Gino will take a huge cap hit next offseason, but they also have other guys like Tyler Lockett, who is on another big contract and who is currently taking a lot of that cap space with his contract. That's another situation that I won't really dive into, but that's another thing that the Seahawks have to consider because of, how much production he's going to give you. He's older now. He's a household name in Seattle. He's given them a lot of good things, but now with a new head coach, that they don't have that sentimental connection really to them as Pete Carroll would potentially. So it could be easier, but a lot of tough decisions could be down the road for them. And in terms of Drew Lock and where he stands in all of this, he's actually a free agent in March officially, and he kind of makes sense that you wouldn't want to commit to him too much. He was a backup for the majority of his time. Really, in the NFL, he only had 1 year where he played more than 9 or 8 games in Denver. And with Seattle, he's just, really accepted that backup role. He's been with them at a point where he'll come in to step in when Geno Smith isn't available, where when he's needed to really, and he's been sort of a game manager, not really wasting too many opportunities to come in, do his job and not really waste anything at that point. At the same time, it's difficult with him. If you decide not to sign him, you get rid of one, but then you're stuck with Geno Smith, and then, where do you go from there? If he were to get hurt, or if he were to move on from him, are you willing and ready to move on or to look for another quarterback right away under a new head coach, under already a lot of things that you have to worry about? Where do you stand with that, and where do you stand on that process of trying to move on with the quarterback? Because, a lot of teams, that resets everything. You look at other franchises that are still looking for their franchise guy, not to mention already like the Bears, the Commanders, the Vikings to some extent, the Raiders, all these teams. It's a lot easier said than done to find a quarterback with that, or at least that could take you far in the playoffs and in the regular season. It's going to be tough for either of these guys to do it, and for the Seahawks to move on with one of these guys because of, like I mentioned, the age, the contract, and everything. The Seahawks have a lot to figure out, and really what to do with his defense as well, because Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner are also free agents. I'm sure they'd love to shore up that offensive line. There's good free agents out there, but they have to figure out where the money should go, where they should allocate all those things. With the NFL Combine going on, there's a good opportunity for them to meet with these other teams and with these other representatives of the quarterbacks especially. And nothing has been really said after this with regards to the quarterbacks, Geno Smith or Drew Lock. A lot of times with the NFL Combine being there, you have Saquon's representatives, Tua's representatives going to the Combine and meeting with the members of the organization. Nothing has been reported on the Seahawks end, what they're going to do with their quarterbacks. But, it's, in a way, if you think about it, for the quarterbacks, Geno Smith, Drew Lock, more specifically Geno, because more likely than not, he will be the starter. I don't see the Seahawks making a drastic move, but this should really light a fire under him, try to motivate him in a way. He has to prove himself all over again for this new coach. Doesn't really know too much about him. He has to go out there and prove himself once again. And I think that would not only do wonders for Geno Smith, but it could buy the Seahawks some more time if they're able to get the best out of Geno with these sort of comments and produce 1 or 2 more years of him at an average to above average level. If he's able to do that, I think it gives them more time, obviously, to rebuild that defense, which is slowly getting back to a very competitive level. Drafting Devin Witherspoon. You have to figure out what you do with Jamal Adams. But Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen, I think, were great picks in the secondary. They have to find a bit more pass rush and figure out what they want to do with those linebackers. But, it's slowly getting there. And I think defensively, I'm not really worried about them. But offensively, they have to figure out what to do with the O-line. Like I mentioned, the quarterbacks and such like that. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process, but at least they're in a spot right now where this could turn into a positive, is basically what I'm trying to say in the end, because with Mike McDonald coming in here, it's a good prove-it chance for these quarterbacks. If they want a job in the NFL being one of the quarterbacks, it's a great chance to do so. And Geno Smith, like I mentioned, is a bit older. Drew Lock could come in, re-sign with the Seahawks, and prove it more than Geno Smith. And now he's got a job, and he could change the trajectory of his career with that sort of move. You don't really know what could play from this, but it was something that drew my attention because of, everybody talking about the Bears, the Raiders, the Vikings. The Seahawks aren't really set on their quarterback whatsoever. I wanted to bring it up here and talk about that. But the NFL now currently is filled with quarterback questions. One of the biggest ones, ironically, is with the New York Giants that extended their current quarterback to a long-term deal, but now it seems there's more questions than ever around him and what they should do with him. A lot of reports are saying from New York that General Manager Joe Schoen, Brian Dable could be on the hot seat, and what are they willing to do to save their job? And if it's really the best for the Giants organization in the long run, that discussion and whether the Giants should trade up or not is going to come in the last segment of the show. I'm going to send it to a quick break right now, and I'm going to bring you guys that topic after this break. to break down what the Giants should do, in my estimation, with Daniel Jones and within the draft this coming offseason. Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast with the final segment of the show, the final discussion of the show. Always try to make this one a much open-ended topic, one that I see and I want to bring up on here on my show and give you guys a good opportunity to let me know what you guys think of this. An interesting one with the New York Giants. One team that I think a lot of people wouldn't have guessed would be in the quarterback market with Daniel Jones and having given him that huge contract last season, a 4-year, $160 million contract. Now to question him the season after that, it's a bit of a shock, I'm sure, to many, but to some people it might seem like it's been coming. You know, arguments could be made for both sides because of, on one side you have Daniel Jones and his injury questions. He's coming off a torn ACL that happened to him in November. Before that, he's had 2 serious neck injuries in each of the last 2 seasons before last season with the ACL. And, you know, those facts are set in stone already. And then for the Giants to go out and extend him with such a lucrative deal, in my opinion, based on the results he's produced, put questions into my mind. But a lot of the discussion last year was, did he deserve that money or did Saquon deserve that money at the time? Obviously, Saquon got franchise tag last year, was on that 1-year deal, and now they're not going to franchise tag him. And essentially, they sort of made their choice by going with Daniel Jones over Saquon Barkley. That's another discussion for a different day. If you want to think that was the right choice or it wasn't, you know, you could comment on that all you want, but the facts is that Daniel Jones was penciled in to be here for a lot longer than now he's put into question too. And, you know, recent rumors with ESPN's Jordan Renan have come out recently, just yesterday or the day before, that, you know, general manager Joe Shane and Brian Dable are in a particular situation now that they're entering their 3rd year in New York, and this is sort of a make or break year for both of them, at least in my opinion, and I'm sure in a lot of people's opinions, because Brian Dable came in, first year couldn't have gone better. Honestly, he won the Coach of the Year. He took the Giants to the playoffs. They won a playoff game on the road against the Minnesota Vikings. Daniel Jones was looking great. Offensively, everyone was asking, where did this come from? All they needed was a coach all this time. Daniel Jones is going to pan out to be this really great quarterback, it seemed at the time, because of the results that they had in their first year. Then last year, it was obviously a lot more difficult and a lot more different. Daniel Jones, like I mentioned, those injuries. Offensively, it just didn't look right. The lack of receivers, the poor play from the offensive line, everything that could have went wrong did go wrong for the Giants, and it looked really bad just this past year. And now you're in this 3rd year, this tiebreaker year, if you will, where people are now going to start asking questions around the coach and around general manager Joe Schoen because, at first it's the players, and if it doesn't change, if no real improvements are made, it starts to build up more and more to the coach, to the front office members, and people start calling for their names now. And now you're in an interesting conundrum where you don't want to say you're looking out for yourself because you want to be about the team. That's what you're there for, to build the team up. If you're the general manager, if you're the Giants head coach, you want to say you're there for the players, helping this team become better. But, it's always in the back of your mind. You can't say it's not that. This is your career essentially on the line here for Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. They might be thinking this could be it for me if I'm not able to produce at a high enough level with the players that I have, or if I'm not able to make a drastic change with the roster that I have. How's it going to look for me after the season? Am I going to get fired during the middle of the season? I have to do something, or else doing nothing is just as bad as doing something and not having it pan out, because you might get fired anyway, so you might as well give it a try, is where I'm trying to get to. And that leads to the scenario now that Jordan Renan reported on yesterday of potentially the Giants moving up in the draft to get a guy that they may like. The more popular name that I've been seeing has been Drake May. He does seem to be, or he's starting to become the quarterback that I think a lot of teams and a lot of executives think could be more within their reach, because slowly, Caleb Williams is the one. A lot of people have him going already to the Bears. But I think a lot of people are starting to realize now that Jaden Daniels is a little bit more athletic than Drake May. He's a bit more electrifying, exciting, and he draws more of an eye than Drake May does, especially after the season that Drake May had, where he had some moments where he missed some pretty bad throws. He didn't look as accurate, as exciting as he did 2 years ago. So I think Drake May is slowly falling into that reach of these other teams that need a quarterback. And because of that, it raises these questions. Should the Giants try to trade up for him? ESPN's Jordan Renan reported yesterday that if the situation presented itself correctly, the Giants would be seriously willing to look at the quarterback position. Then General Manager Joe Schoen today said, that he has still confidence in Daniel Jones. He gave an update on how he's doing physically, but he didn't really give a solid answer on, this is my guy. We signed into a contract for a reason. We're going to stick with Daniel Jones because we believe in him and his ability. He didn't say that at all. He left the door open pretty much for them to do this. So it backs up what Jordan Renan was saying in his report. And, it's still early in the process, but people within the organization was reported that they believe they have to get a quarterback prior to the decision, or they have to know what that quarterback is about, because another topic that is brought up if you're going to bring in a new quarterback and evaluate these guys is how they are on a personal level, mentally. Are they able to handle that New York market? Because regardless of who comes in, if they're not able to handle it, it doesn't matter how talented or how great they look on the field. For example, if you look at Zach Wilson, he went number 2 overall to the Jets. The talent was crazy leading up to the draft. His pro day really sticks out to me because he made a lot of crazy throws. People thought this kid was going to be, something else, was going to bring New York back to what it was almost like a decade ago now. And you see where he is now, a backup on the Jets. They went out and got Aaron Rodgers, because Aaron Rodgers and Zach Wilson, you could say they have similar sort of talents. I'm sure Aaron Rodgers would say, and he has said, that talent-wise Zach Wilson has it, but you never really see Aaron Rodgers complimenting the kid's mental side of it, personality, because I think that is a huge thing in New York, the market there, the media attention, the criticism you get in New York in a larger market than these other franchises. It's a serious thing, and it certainly gets to some of these guys. And if the Giants were to go down this route, they have to seriously consider this. side of it because you don't want a situation basically like a Zach Wilson situation. You're drafting these guys high, like a Sam Darnold situation as well. You draft these guys high, and then they have great talent, no doubt, but they're not able to deal with the outside stuff, and it affects their play on the field going forward. So that's another thing to consider. Options-wise, if you want to see maybe one of these top 3 quarterbacks drop in an instance, and then you don't really have to do anything because that's the other side of it, right? If you want to go all in and you want to get one of these top 3 guys, maybe Drake May moving up to the 3rd spot with the Patriots, you really have to give up a lot of assets if you want to move into the top 3 because the Patriots, the Commanders, the Bears all need quarterbacks, and I'm sure they all think that passing up on one of these guys could look really bad on them. So if any of these teams outside the top 3 want to get in to that range of drafting one of these guys, they're going to have to give up a lot. Are the Giants willing to do that? Are they ready to do that? My sentiment is they wouldn't be because, they need O-line help. The pass rush isn't really there. Kayvon Thibodeau is really the only threat. They have virtually no A1 top-tier receivers on their roster. So if you do go get a quarterback, how much better is it really going to be with them throwing it to somebody that might not be open, having less than half a second or a second to throw the ball with the O-line still being poor? Are you willing to risk it all in there and risk it all on one of these guys if you're Brian Daboll, Joe Shane, just to save your job, not really considering what's best for the team going forward? What could be best for the team going forward could be to stockpile these drafts, maybe moving back and not drafting a quarterback. It could be unpopular. It could lead to another season of struggle. But in the long run, it could be better for this team. It might not be with Brian Daboll and Joe Shane, but at least they're able to build that process and get it going rather than, trying to save their careers in a sense and drafting one of these guys overall. And if it doesn't work, you really set the organization further back a lot because if the quarterback doesn't work, then you gave up too much and you don't have a lot of things to rebuild and replenish that mistake you just made. Again, I'm in the same situation that I've harped already on the show. To move up in this draft for a quarterback, you have to be one step away from being a contender for the conference championship, in my opinion. You have to have at least made the playoffs one or twice over the last few seasons to consider doing that. And obviously the Giants haven't done that. The Commanders haven't done that. The Patriots haven't done that, which is why I keep harping on the idea of stockpiling these drafts, improving the team going forward, and not going crazy over one of these quarterbacks. Even though they are exciting, they could be game changers. A lot of their success depends on who's around them, what the organization does do in the years following up to help them. And I just don't think the Giants are in a situation right now where trading up in the long run, they could have the success that a lot of teams do have with these young quarterbacks. You look at Patrick Mahomes, nobody thought he was going to be great. The Bills for Josh Allen. It doesn't really work out when you trade up, gamble it on one guy, and force it in a way to expect them to be good, even though they're not ready. It's an interesting scenario because of all the factors that I mentioned. The Giants already having a quarterback, essentially, but now there's questions being raised around them. Say you lose Saquon, the team undoubtedly gets worse, and you still want to go for a quarterback. If they lose Saquon, there's no way they could try and get a quarterback and try to have that fill the massive hole that they have everywhere else. Right now, I think the focus should be on Saquon. If they re-sign him, okay, then you can sort of build something there. You have a foundation to build on going forward with a long-term deal with Saquon, but you have to be prepared for what could be losing Saquon, and then you're in a tough spot where you just have to swallow the bullet, really, in my opinion, and just go out and just try and get this team better going forward. But it was an interesting topic that I saw a lot of people talking about in the media in general, with all the draft talk happening and all the quarterback talk happening. It's probably just going to build on this. There's going to be a lot more talk when the first domino falls, but it is an interesting topic to talk about. We're going to put a pin in it for now because that's all the time I have for this episode. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone listening or who watches afterwards as well. I want to remind you guys again to please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of this network's content. There's a lot of good stuff on there that you guys should go check out. If you want to see more of me and you like this show, please make sure to go check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube for more live shows that I've done already and the YouTube shorts that I produce each and every weekday, as well as the individual segments of the entire live episode if you want to just catch up on 1 or 2 episodes that you might have missed. But as always, I've been your host, Manny Maradiaga. Tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football coverage on this channel. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and I wish you guys a good rest of your night, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that